Welcome everyone to a new episode, the 48th episode exactly, of Cruel Justice Empowered by Witness to Innocent. Today we have a case out of Anderson County, Texas, inmate Robert Roberson. He was accused of killing his 2-year-old daughter, which had medical issues. And, he took her to the hospital, and it's like most when dealing with kids, police and society just assume the parent is responsible in the cause of the death, and they have no evidence of that. But that's just a theory that society feel like if a parent bring in a child to the hospital, they feel like automatically first thing they think is abuse. And in this case, without any evidence of abuse, they convicted this young man and placed him on death row. And for 20 years, he's been fighting for his life to get off of death row. It's hard when you're dealing with people and you're questioned by the police at a time that you're grieving, that you're not understanding, that you're losing a loss, a loved one, someone as a child as close as that is very, very dramatic. And today we have a special guest, his attorney. I am very honored to have his attorney here to give us the information and explain a little bit about this case and what's going on and what is needed to try to help this young man. So with further introduce, I allow Ms. Gretna Swain
That's
to
right.
introduce herself. So tell us who you are and
Well, thank you, Herman. And I must say that intro, you really captured one of the core problems with these cases, that when you're talking about something as distressing as the death of a child, that everyone has trouble. Everyone, the medical personnel, the law enforcement, the district attorneys, and certainly all the families touched by this. So you have a situation where it's especially hard, I think, to appreciate, objective fact finding. And what happened with Robert, what we now know is he is a person with autism. So you add that layer, you have a person who, because of his own disability, can't communicate in a way that is seen as normal. One of the things that happened the moment he gets to the hospital with his collapsed child, and he's not somebody with any medical training, he can't explain her condition, and all he can tell them is some basic information, and they keep telling him, that's not good enough, and meanwhile judging him by his lack of emotion, or that he didn't cry in the right place, or he didn't look like other parents. A lot of his trial was about people coming on him and having that kind of testimony. So, which itself is kind of crazy, but it goes to the heart of this problem with the emotion around, just seeing the body of a 2.5-year-old child collapse. It's just heartbreaking for anybody. So I think that is, the heart of all of these problems. In Robert's case is especially complex because this child has a lot of medical issues that nobody was taking into account. So, I got involved in his case when he was on the verge of being executed. And really, it's quite a miracle that involved many people coming together. In 2016, he had years of what I would say was, inadequate representation, to put it mildly. He is the person from death row who started to learn more about this shaken baby theory that had been used against him at trial, and realizing there were problems with it. And he's writing these letters to his lawyers saying, can you look into this? And they were saying, we can't do that. We can't go back and have any new facts. Well, luckily, Texas passed this statute, and it actually created a way, even after you're supposedly done with all your appeals, where you can go back into court and say, look, the science that was used to convict me is wrong, or the scientists who testified got this wrong. And this is kind of a unique thing. And that is how we got Robert back into court, and stopped his execution. But we still, and then we spent years developing the new evidence, putting on all that new evidence to explain what really happened with Nikki, that it wasn't shaken baby that explained her death. And unfortunately, all that evidence still doesn't seem to have done Robert any good. So that's where we are now. But his case is still pending, and so I shouldn't be that pessimistic. There is still a chance that the reviewing court will look at all this new evidence and look at the fact that the testimony at his trial that was considered expert testimony, almost all of it has changed or been debunked by subsequent developments. If they will look at that, it is absolutely clear the man deserves a new trial, even if you don't look at all the additional evidence about what really caused Nikki's death and why there was no crime at all.
I have a question, right? So here it is. We depended on science back then. Where science back then was in new developing stages, and they had this theory of shape the baby. Now, when they came up with this theory, they also tried to try him on another theory that actually got dropped in court with no signs of evidence of that particular crime and thing. And my thing is, to the jury, that would have made me feel like something is wrong about this case now. Here it is, you want to allege sexual assault on the child, but there's no allegations of abuse. There's no allegations of sexual conduct. There's no evidence of it. And they just tried to get the jury to convict him on either or. And to me, that's and that's one of the biggest problems here in the United States, is that our justice system is a great justice system, but it's the people of the jury that always getting it wrong, that cause these wrongful convictions and don't question things as they should question. They don't question the evidence as they have the right to. They don't, half of them don't even understand what beyond a reasonable doubt is. Right. And they sit on a jury and they don't want to be there in jury trial. And people don't know the importance it is to jury. So now here it is. They try to get the jury to convict him on a charge that has no evidence, so they throw that charge out. But they convict him on another charge. They convict him on a charge that is just a theory itself. And to me, that's something is seriously wrong. And the problems that scare me is that for some reason, the state of Texas do not like to address when they have did something wrong. They don't want to. They don't want to overturn these sentences. In this, I mean, we got Rodney Reed over there. We had Todd Willingham. Todd Willingham case, I would never forget. I would never forget Todd Willingham, where all these experts came back in and said, "Hey, no, you got it wrong. It wasn't this," and Texas still refused to do it. So that is one of the fearful things. And hopefully the system has improved. But from your opinion, dealing with this case, I mean, how do you think the jury actually got this wrong, when here it is as plain as day in front of them that these are theories? Theories cannot be proved beyond a reasonable doubt without evidence.
Well, I think, first of all, if all the jury is hearing is a theory, the only people that have fancy degrees are coming in and saying, this is the truth. This is what I believe. Even Robert's defense lawyer at trial stood up in the jury selection and over again said, yes, unfortunately, this is a case of shaken baby syndrome. We agree. Though his own client didn't agree. But they put this on the record in their opening statement. They said it shouldn't be capital murder, but the only way to explain this child's death is shaken baby. Because that tells you in 2003, when this case was tried, there was no real questioning. It had just been, as you said, it was a theory. It was thrown out there without any evidence. There's no science to back it up. But then it became just taught in medical school as if it just were the truth. Meanwhile, at the same time, you had a real rise starting in the 70s of concern about child abuse, which was legitimate. And so all these laws started to get passed about mandatory reporting of any suspicion of child abuse. And doctors were required, teachers were required. You didn't have to have evidence, but you had to have some suspicion. And if not, you might be in legal jeopardy. So that's, the climate. You have medical schools teaching this shaken baby thing as if it's a real thing when it's not. And you have doctors knowing, if I think there might be child abuse and I don't say anything, I could get in trouble. And that comes together at the time when Robert is, bringing his sick child to the hospital. It's still a problem to this day. Now, if you had a trial today and somebody tried to bring out the kind of shaken baby testimony at his trial today, it would be laughed out of court. It's much more now nuanced. They say, oh, we have to eliminate everything else. We have to know everything about this child's, physical condition. With Nikki's case, Robert's daughter, the child abuse expert at the hospital, the very day she saw her, said, oh, well, I understand this child was totally well. And so nothing else could explain this but shaken baby syndrome. Well, this child wasn't totally well. She had been sick for a week. She had 104.5 fever 2 days before. She was being given heavy drugs, prescribed drugs, including codeine-laced cough syrup. She had been sick most of her life. I mean, she had been to the doctor so many times, it's hard to count. She had a long history of breathing trouble. So the idea that this was a totally well child who just mysteriously collapsed, false. All right. But at that time, this was presented as sound science. So I know it's crazy. Now, the other thing you raised, which is huge and is part of how you understand how Robert ends up on death row, is that they were allowed to bring in these sexual abuse allegations with nothing. And I say nothing, I should put that in quotes. What they had is one nurse who took it upon herself in the ER, in the middle of triage. This child is, on life support, and she decides to do a sexual assault exam on a 2-year-old without any reason to do it. And then claims, and they're pictures. This is horrible, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you, they're pictures she had taken of people, we don't even know who they are, without gloves on their hands, grabbing at this child's bottom, taking pictures of the child's bottom. And they claim, oh, I see anal tears. Well, this child had had diarrhea for a week. Her bottom was going to be red. There were going to be tears of the skin. That is what they latched onto. So this one nurse who claimed at trial that she was a certified sexual assault nurse examiner. Well, it turns out she wasn't. She'd never gotten the certification. But she was their, main witness. She was on the stand almost longer than anybody else. And the things she said, quite frankly, are outrageous. But that was the some evidence that allowed them to make this allegation. Now, then the other medical examiner, the child abuse expert, the medical examiner who did the autopsy, they said they found no evidence to support this sexual assault allegation. And there was a rape kit, nothing came back to support it. It should never have been before the jury, but they had this one nurse and she had her little theory. So to me, that is something I look at and I think, how was this allowed? And I can't explain it, but I also know, from a human perspective, if I'm a juror, and the minute I'm sitting there in jury selection and they start talking about sexual assault of a 2-year-old, my mind is going to scramble. And excuse me, I think that's what happened. They beat this drum of the possibility of sexual abuse, and then nobody even cares about, whether the cause of death stuff makes any sense. They're blinded by the horror that this child had been molested. And, they dropped it only at the end of trial. So,
excuse me, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Me personally, common sense. Here it is. Like you say, she had breathing problems. Breathing problems will cause pressure to the brain. It can also cause an aneurysm in the brain. I know that for a fact. And pneumonia, it can cause you to stop breathing. And, to me, it's like with her conditions, and there's no evidence of abuse or anything like that. In fact, it was an incident that where she actually fell off the bed, and I haven't seen a baby that haven't fell at least one time out of the chair or the bed. I haven't seen that. That's just something that happens. We try to prevent those things, but sometimes it happens. But with those underlying medical conditions, and there's no evidence that it was like foul play, I still can't understand how the jury believed beyond a reasonable doubt that the state proved their case. Here it is, they speaking about a shaken, the shaken baby theory, but I guess what the jury must have done was felt like, because half of them probably wouldn't even know about what shaken baby syndrome is. I just learned that through this case,
Right.
So I know a lot of them didn't know that. So they're probably just thinking this new and that they, that the examiners are speaking the truth about it because they learn and know about it. But with the underlying medical conditions that the baby kept going in and out of the hospital, that creates a doubt in the case. Well, could one of these underlying cause the death? Which one of those could cause bleeding in the brain? Which numerous of them can actually cause bleeding in the brain. You got bleeding in the brain, but you don't have no bruises on the outside to show that, it was a hit with a blunt object, or it was hit or anything like that. So I still can't understand how they got past beyond a reasonable doubt that this theory is foolproof.
Well, Herman, what you're latching on to, and that's what we really hope the court will appreciate, is all these other explanations for what may have caused her to stop breathing. And then what happens is you have an oxygen deprivation to the brain. You end up with bleeding in the subdural space, which is the dura is this membrane that protects the brain. You're not supposed to have blood in that space. But if you're deprived of oxygen, what happens is those tiny vessels can break, and then you start to have blood. And then what happens, the lack of oxygen then leads to brain swelling. The brain is starving for oxygen, it swells, and then the blood is accumulating, further putting pressure on the brain, and that can lead to retinal hemorrhage. All right, so it's these three conditions: the subdural blood, the swollen brain, and then bleeding in the eyes. That's what they thought proved shaken baby. That was and that's what these doctors came in and told this jury. When you see these three things, this shows that there were these violent rotational forces applied to the child that cause this internal condition. Now, stepping back, years later, when we know a lot more, you realize violent shaking, especially of a 2-year-old child who weighs about 37, 38 pounds. I mean, to pick them up and shake them violently enough that you're causing internal brain damage. First of all, there's no proof anybody's ever been able to accomplish that. Even they did this experiment utilizing football players, couldn't generate enough force on the dummies they were working with to suggest you would ever get that kind of injury. But the thing that would be injured would be the neck. The neck of a 2-year-old is stronger than an infant, but it's still vulnerable. Nikki had no damage to her neck. There's nothing wrong with her neck. So there's no evidence that this child had been shaken, but the jury's hearing that, oh, what you're seeing inside was caused by shaking. And they weren't hearing anything else. Now, meanwhile, they weren't hearing everything they heard about her health at trial was minimized. They didn't hear she had pneumonia. That is the new evidence. They heard nothing about pneumonia. They heard, and the things they heard about all of her sickness throughout her childhood, all the doctors from the local hospitals who had treated her and sent her home were like, oh yeah, that has nothing to do with this situation.
I have a question from somebody that's on Facebook, Christian Hoffman. He says, I am already interested in Robert case since 2008 and traveled from Germany to Texas 9 times. There was a decision of the Supreme Court recently, finally over new evidence. Does that change Robert case?
Has it yet? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that question.
There was a decision of the Supreme Court recently finalizing over new evidence. Does that change Robert's case?
Oh, I think maybe they're talking about the very recent Supreme Court decision about that's a completely different issue in that that's about whether you get a chance to develop new evidence in federal habeas proceedings. And this is a state court proceeding he is in. And the only reason he was able to develop this new evidence is because of state law, not because of federal law. But yeah, the Supreme Court's recent decision has sort of slammed the door on the possibility of doing anything new in federal court, which is very scary for a lot of people. But that will not affect Robert's situation. But I want to throw something out there. I don't know if you followed the fact that Oklahoma they're now trying to set 25 dates, 25 execution dates. And the second person on the list is this guy named Glossop, who has for years asserted his innocence. And a fancy law firm has just published this big investigative report where they went and on their own money, went and interviewed all these people and have produced a report showing this guy is innocent. All right, this is a sign that our system is failing. I mean, everybody doesn't have access to a fancy law firm that can spend, hundreds and thousands of its own dollars and lots of attorney time to go and spend, do a deep dive into a case and then try to convince the state to not kill somebody. But that's where we are, that's what's happening, is that you're having to get completely outside of the judicial system to try to stop states from killing innocent people. I mean, it's madness. It's real madness. And that is my fear for Robert. I mean, if Robert is failed again by the judicial system, what do we do? Because any reasonable person looking at the evidence, and I think the challenge is spending the time to look at all the evidence and realize, you were stunned, Herman, that the jury didn't know she had pneumonia. No, they hadn't diagnosed her with it. And it took us unbelievable efforts to be able to get a new doctor to look at the autopsy slides under a microscope and look at her lungs and realize she had pneumonia. She had this kind of pneumonia that infiltrates the lungs, and it's called interstitial viral pneumonia, not bronchial pneumonia, not respiratory pneumonia, a different kind of pneumonia. They didn't even know how to find this when Nikki died. And, you know, the resistance we got at every turn, just trying to look at those slides, trying to get an expert, trying to get him access. And this is somebody who's become an expert in this area. He's a trauma expert in the brain, and he's realized what people have been calling trauma with the shaken baby cases is not trauma at all. It's oxygen deprivation. So that means you go look at the lungs.
And the thing about it is that throughout history, it's a lot of people that has been exonerated from the fact that experts back in the years earlier has got it wrong many times. Many times. It's a lot of expert. And then you have experts that can testify, and they testify this and this and to the exact science, but then you turn around, you do a DNA on the case, and it's not even the person that's there. You know, it's crazy how they depend on the expert, but something else they don't bring out when when they own doing a trial. The experts have hundreds and thousands of cases. They're constantly, it's like the public defender's office and these attorneys with so many cases to deal with that they can't deal with it efficient enough. And that goes the same way with experts. A lot of experts, you know, they get it wrong because they got so many cases and they're not doing a thorough job, as you would say.
Right.
So,
well, it's about resources. You know, we have a chronically underfunded indigent defense system in this country. And, you know, if you really wanted to make sure you weren't convicting innocent people, I mean, the first place to start is give enough resources at the beginning. But it is this kind of crazy thing we have that, you know, we underfund defense, we don't give resources. I mean, Robert had not a single expert testify on the issue of cause of death. And again, because his lawyers decided, oh yeah, we're convinced of the shaken baby thing, we're not even going to talk to anybody. I mean, that's crazy. That wouldn't happen today. But the idea that, you know, you're limited to try to prove the truth based on what money the court might give you, it's very scary. And then after there's a judgment, no one wants to go back and look again. The argument is that, you know, finality is what's so important. Well, that, you know, why should the truth matter less than a finality, especially in a system where we're not putting enough resources in to find out the truth in the first place?
Well, so, we're coming to an end, you know, unfortunately.
Oh, that was fast.
They only give you 30 minutes, but it's you know, this show gave out a totally different look at the justice system, especially when it comes to expert witnessing and how they're dealing with cases when it comes with kids. They're not actually reviewing the evidence. They're just thought process in their mind when it comes to a child that society just automatically think it's an awful thing, and the parent and you know, and the parent haven't even did anything. In fact, you know, we have two ladies, female death row exonerees that, you know, had to go through that. And it's basically, to my opinion, is the fact that it was a child involved, and, you know, they don't get a chance to grieve. You know, they just take the parent, take the parent away, and they're questioning them at a time where they're dealing with so much, they can't think straight, you know, so they batter them for hours and hours until they get to a point where they can say, okay, yeah, we're gonna charge you with it. And that's not right on on behalf. It should be something like a grace period before they can actually even be questioned, to allow
Right.
them to elaborate. But before we go, is there anything that you would like to share with anyone? Anything that they can do to help? I know Jenny has put in the comments that the website Justice for Robert Roberson. If you look in the comments, you know, you can see where she put the link to that, so they can go to,
Great.
and other links. But what can people do to try to help Robert in this situation?
Well, right now, I do think, yeah, if you're interested in learning more about his case and about the whole shaken baby phenomenon, to look at that website that was created by one of his supporters. And it does try to keep up with some of the developments in the case. We are now, in a holding pattern. And that doesn't mean the fight stops. There's always more to learn. And certainly, I would say, one of the best things you could do for Robert is send him some words of support. The man has been on death row, as you said, for almost 20 years. He had his entire life destroyed. It's not just losing his daughter and then being accused of these horrible crimes, then losing his entire extended family. I mean, it's just been a catastrophe for so many people. And Robert has kept strong because he's a man of really profound faith, and he has a real, almost naive belief that the truth will come out, but he struggles. I mean, he struggles with great despair. So I think knowing that he is being heard out in the world, I mean, I did let him know we were doing this, but of course he can't listen. And, he's shut up in a cement box all day. And if he could know that he is being heard, people care, people are concerned about the system and what his case represents and about him as a person, that would be a beautiful thing. And then, I'm not entirely alone in this, but, we have no resources, but I'm not here to ask for any funding now. It's really about vigilance and eyes on the system. That's what we need.
Well, with that being said, I want to thank everybody, including Miss Gretchen Springfield,
Okay.
for joining us here on this Cruel Justice, the 48th show. We have here at Witness the Innocence is beside you, and we will do what we are allowed to do to assist you. We need to bring real awareness to this. So, look us up on witnessinnocent.org, share this video, Instagram, wherever you need to share it to. Let people learn about this case. And those that wish to get involved, as I say, the website is in the comments, on the Facebook comments. So, you can reach Miss Swin and, help her in any way you can, because this is the thing. Sometimes helps are very hard to find when help is very easy. Help is just maybe signing a petition. Help is maybe sharing the video, and maybe it may reach the right person to view it that can give them the help they need. So don't think that help is just funding. Help is, in many different ways. And the more you speak about things, the more you educate people. And
right, that's so true.
When you also sharing these videos and people learning about these miscarriages of justice, you have to understand those very people may become a jury one day and help prevent a wrongful conviction. So I say to you all, I thank you for joining. I ask that you share, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we have to figure out how to really prevent this when we have some people in power that actually don't worry about it because they go home and sleep. You know, for those that cannot go home and sleep, the lawyers cannot go home and rest. The defendant cannot just go home and rest. You know, and people like ourselves that witness the innocent that's behind this case and things, we can't just rest because we know we got an innocent man in prison that and about to be executed that we're trying to prevent. So I'm saying to everyone, help any kind of way you can, and let's bring Robert home. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you soon on the next um, episode of Cruel Justice.